Welcome. Welcome to the Poetry Flash virtual reading series. I'm Joyce Jenkins, Poetry Flash editor and director, beaming to you from the Poetry Flash office in Berkeley, California. And today we are very pleased to present Kathleen Winter and Kathryn Nuernberger. This reading is co-sponsored by Mo's Books in Berkeley. There is a bookshop.org link in the chat box to purchase Transformer by Kathleen Winter and Kate Nuernberger's Rue. I hope you can check out poetryflash.org for reviews and interviews, David Shattuck's Poetry and Healing column, and a soon-to-be published review of Kathleen Winter's new book, and much, much more. To sign up for our event emails to get notices, scroll down on poetryflash.org to join our mailing list. Here to introduce our poets is Richard Silberg, Poetry Flash Associate Editor.
Hi, everyone. How are you?
A little louder.
We are delighted to have these two quite different and quite astounding, really striking poets. As Joyce told you, well, just to repeat, Kathleen Winter and Kathryn Nuernberger, who goes by Kate, and Kathleen will be reading first. She's going to be reading from her her third book, Transformer. And there's a lot of sexual violence and fear, especially leading into this book. Poems that feel in the beginning as though they are written from personal experience, and then the poems move virtually everywhere through history, Henry VIII, ekphrastic poems. Transformer is about how her dog knows her better than her, that's not what it's about, but it begins with her dog knowing her better than her lover because her expression, his meals depend on her own expression. Kathleen has always struck me as an intuitive writer, a writer. I'm always amazed by how the poems have a kind of intuitive rightness, as though she were a poetic bat echolocating herself. Some of these poems, I have no idea where they come from, the gender of cow in the end, but they always wing in, they always fly intuitively home. So let's give her a warm welcome. Flutter of jazz hands for Kathleen Winter.
Well, thank you so much, Richard. I'm really grateful to Poetry Flash and also, of course, to Joyce Jenkins, who makes Poetry Flash happen. And Richard Silberg's introductions are the gold standard of poetry reading. So I'm just really delighted to get to read for Poetry Flash and get to hear him introduce my work. And I know that it will be lovely to hear him introduce Kathryn Nuernberger's work as well. I'm thrilled to get to read with her. I'm really excited to get to open for her today. She's one of my very favorite poets and prose writers. So we're in for a treat to get to hear her work. And I also want to thank Mo's, and Mo's is a fabulous bookstore, and I'm grateful that they're helping to support this reading. And I want to thank all of you all for being here. It's really nice to get to read to you all we're also fragmented and distanced, and this is such a strange time. So getting to read to people and share my work is a real blessing. And I also want to dedicate the reading. I usually dedicate my readings to someone. This time I want to dedicate it to President-elect Joe Biden and to the Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, and just hoping that we're going to have a more unified, peaceful, and fabulous experience with them. So I can't wait for that to start happening and see the country transformed. So because it's almost the holidays, I've been feeling kind of nostalgic. I've been thinking a whole lot about my mom, who died a little over a year ago. And I've been thinking about my family, just all this, you know, like intense emotion and nostalgia. And so I started even feeling nostalgic for my last book, which is kind of odd. But so I'm going to start out and just read 3 poems from my second book, which came out in 2018. And then I'll switch to the new book. So the first poem that I want to read from my second book, and the second book is called I Will Not Kick My Friends. So this is a poem that's, it's kind of a seasonal Christmassy poem. It's called Advent. And it has some references to an Episcopalian religious experience. So here we go, Advent. The driveway shakes her inner ear. Somebody's coming or going. Darling of deconstruction, give her a sweater, precious lamb, to get a thread. Tactile satisfaction of destruction, yank until recipient's a naked babe. On her advent calendar, some tiny doors should not be opened. Never mind. Pay attention to one blinking light at treetop, murmur of her heating unit under wool. She knows the string of cows is from her grandmother. She spies a painted pig from Uncle George. Here's a rabbit made of glass. Here's a straw man to sacrifice. What liquid in the bubble lights boils red and anxious vertically? What toothless grande dame dented the teething ring silver bell, now dangling by a thread of velvet, ornament, memento? Demoiselle of deconstruction, don't forget you know how not to be destructive. Con's a game of knowing for a girl in fur muff, singing green sleeves at the service, counting hats. Out a door in her head, questions coming about ghosts in trinities, wine, and table with a crush of men, a con job. Darling, don't you think that peacock feather hat at the back of the chapel's full of everlasting life and will not perish? So the church where I went as a child, it did have ladies in the back of the congregation wearing really elaborate hats, and there was this amazing peacock feather hat, this just vivid green. I will never forget. So that inspired that particular poem. So the next of the poems from the older book is set in Ireland, and I should just tell you that there's a reference to the Skellig Peaks. Skellig is a Gaelic word for rock, and off the western coast of Ireland, there are a couple of these really noteworthy triangular shaped islands called the Skelligs. And so there's a little shout out to the Skelligs in here. Oh, and I should tell you, I guess, and I know we're going to hear some history from, or I expect we're going to hear some history from Kathryn too, because she has a lot of really rich historical information in a lot of her writing. And this poem talks about roads that were made out of wood. So they were, you know, handmade, painstakingly made in you know, most medieval areas. And in this case, they're in Ireland, they're going over bogs and other kind of mushy land. And so this poem is called Saint of Labor. I met a man who won't make money. Extreme, he peels away from the medium, like a soaked label, leaving it. listener in this space of bottomless story. What part was real, what part imagined is past, almost past knowing. Wind of hay rising 100 yards in the sky. Ghost coach coursing the lake's edge on a wooden road after May light bleeds away to sea. Eels of light ribboning. 1,000 years later, they burned the ancient handmade roads, dug them up into fire, cremating how many hours, how many lives of labor. I watch fire tearing sunwise after dark. This man must be still to breathe. Hear sheep bleed out to the Skellig peaks. Long work he does to be idle, figure how to make the sea's faces on paper. Among visitors in ruined cottages, we're the ones whose stained fingers speak the same solitude. So the guy I was inspired to write that about was a painter, and he was painting these kind of amazing seascapes while I was there. And he had made his own boat and would go out in the boat and paint these oil paintings, really dramatic oil paintings of sea caves. So, and then the last poem of the book, this is another kind of seasonal poem for me. So it's about a retablo. Retablos, a lot of times they're made in South America or Mexico. They're folk art, and this poem has some of the animals in the retablo are talking. And retablos they're sometimes secular, they're sometimes religious, sometimes it's the nativity scene, sometimes it's a little shop or a village scene or musicians or whatnot. But the retablos that I was inspired by for this poem were in the Santa Fe Folk Art Museum, and I just fell in love with them. So this is called Art Elegy. We were shaped by our environment. We were figures of goats and sheep made out of flour paste. I remember wood boxes we lived in then, winged doors patterned with flowers. 3 levels, unconnected by stairs, by anything less than narrative. The people, the artists, were always loading us onto trucks that churned the dirt roads that clung to the Andes, or staging us at a manger within sight of the baby, or selling us in adorable markets painted with glaze. Silver bird in the box of the sky was a knife. You were a goat with sideways face, with only one eye to meet the world's gaze between wings of doors and roses. Handmade was your claim. All right, so I'm going to switch now to the book that came out this year. It's called Transformer, and it looks like that. And it has a cover by Fred Tomaselli, who's an artist I really like, who's from San Diego. Although I don't know where he lives now. I don't know him, but I just love his work. So he's a super generous guy and let me use the painting for the cover. And so I just want to thank him and appreciate him because he's an amazing artist, I think. So, so Transformer, what Richard said, I loved about this idea of being an echolocating bat. I'm so grateful to be compared to that. And that makes me very happy. I write a lot about animals. I actually have a bat poem in the book that I probably will have to just read for, Richard's sake. But yeah, there are bats here. I live in the country. I live in Glenelg, and sometimes we get bats in our house and we have to like throw a blanket over them and drag them out of the bedroom. So it's very exciting. And the book has poems about location, poems about this part of the world, the country, but it also has poems that take place in other parts of the country or the world. It's kind of divided into sections, 4 sections. And the last section is about relationships. So I want to start, I'm going to read from the back to the front of the book this time. Not the whole book, don't worry. But yeah, I'm going to start with the last poem in the book. And it's set in Texas. I was really so fortunate to get to live in Texas for 4 months in 2015. on a ranch by myself for that time. And this is a poem about that. And I'll just tell you, I grew up in Texas, but we had mud daubers there, which are kind of like some kind of a wasp hornety thing. And they don't like to put their nests, they don't like the sky. They want to put their nests on a ceiling, you know, on a roof. And so people, they paint their ceilings of their porches blue to fake out the mud daubers. So I think that'll maybe help you. So here we go. The porch roof's sky blue ceiling. Looking to be moved, the gravel pathway vanished into moonlessness. Not before a black hose bisected it in the porch zone light. Fear of little breaches, slicing the heel through which seeps the soul's red light. Fear of trivial experience, waste of the unknown quantity of summer nights. Be moved by the porch roof's pale blue painted ceiling if you are an insect, dissuaded from staking your claim. Mud daubers stinglessly pass through the breached green door screen, searching for a ceiling, not a sky. I trapped myself in wariness, housing contingency in an anxious eye. Old as I am, still dumb, why won't I say it? The key is hidden, always someplace terribly obvious, under the only blooming thing on the front porch, inside an iron horse just right of the front door. This wink in the mind's smoky mirror, this love of the first person passing. And then the next poem from the relationship section is a poem that was inspired by the Elgin marbles, which were the frieze of the Parthenon, which were stolen by the British and taken, you know, out of Greece and are now in the British Museum. And they're fragmented and not complete, and some of them are missing key components, but they are still pretty amazing to look at. And so that's what inspired this poem, which is called Parthenon Marbles. Why do we fail our spouses when we can still remember their sweetness when we were young? Time ran slowly for us, weather was never an impediment, money even. Who needed to be right? Who needed sleep or words? Last words floating in thick clarity, concentration. 2 coffee beans and a glass of anise, skiffs on an expensive lake. A pair of black ducks in Zurich June's chill waves. Our languor, as a swan beat its feet across the surface, running on water for 15, 20 meters, straining. Its awful body changing, elongating, almost ascending. Now the evening, like this instrument, slowly going dry. The fountain pen, the light, the minds inside your skull and his. Love survives like those sublime reliefs whose torsos live more or less in the British Museum. Master, maiden, warrior, even the cow stretching to smell earth before its sacrifice. Which private collection or lofty public hall holds the hearts, the heads that once were ours? And then I'm kind of glad to read that sort of in the middle of the reading and not at the end, because it's such a sad poem, I think. But this one is the last of the sort of relationship poems, and it's a poem about aging, and it's called "To Straddle is to Be." To straddle is to be enduringly interesting, he said. Body, time machine, magic me back to attraction, mind telling itself, I know what, you don't. In 40 years, there will be no more redheads. Yes, no more. On whose authority do you delete me? With dream work, we honor our breathing, a making well married to living. Ideas whose music swings the trees, fir boughs on the downbeat. But now, this wakeful brain, saying, how many blackbirds do we need to embody the world? 2 kangaroos, 2 ocelots, 2 buffaloes, 2 sheep, but I can't find my sleep. The leveler, gifter of invisible tattoos, things I loved then, titles, accusations, bones and shells, antiquated areoles, sailplane on glass. In only one direction am I going, frigid here most of the year. Upper middle, natural order, peer, out the window into mist, the world's cold sweat to one mindset, or blackberry's bath. Pretty polyvalence, must have 2, or we won't survive. To straddle is to be enduringly. Okay, so now I'm going to switch sections. I really kind of am enjoying going backwards in my book. The next section is a lot of poems about other artwork, and so ekphrastic poems. You guys, I know most of you all are poets, which is really fun to see. This one is inspired by this exhibit that I saw with my friend Eva Valencia at the Art Museum in Phoenix. And it was a really cool exhibit of art from Teotihuacan that was on loan from Mexico. And so the speaker is remarking on that culture through sort of a fantastical viewpoint. Okay, so it's called the Seer. The chastening face of genius will bite you rather than see you do something foolish. Short declarative sentences or swerving intestinal peregrinations, the message still delivered with contempt, as though the seer never had to stay home with the sitter, was never forced to start over from scratch. At the game board, the seer rides a tidal urge to slaughter, desire towering as strategy comes clear. Crushed between their gums like a cumulus of caramel candy popcorn, your powdered granular, pathetic victim of a banal sin. At Teotihuacan, the theocrats made ornate necklaces of ersatz teeth to hang across the bare chests of their sacrificial human animals. Almost garlands, collars featuring whole jawbones full of carved stone molars, canines, bicuspids of freshwater shell. 8 jawbone arcs of jeweled faux teeth strung on gut cords around each victim's neck. Across his chest, a brazen gambit to inflate the sacrificial tally. The seer discreetly conceives the feathered serpent as a useful fiction. Yet what could be better than slavery for raising the foundation of a pyramid? Meet the seer under a full moon at the jaguar pedestal, where the entrance to the National Museum in 15 centuries will be, and they'll augur a last handful of your fatal mistakes. For starters, how you were so stupid about fresh water, or how you suspended disbelief even after you knew why the priests grew so fat. So one more poem from this section about other pieces of art. And this one is, a lot of the poems in this section are also sort of about class differences and you know, inequitable income distribution, which has been plaguing us here in the good old USA big time, but also, of course, has been a problem in a lot of other times and places. So, so this poem is, it's a kind of about a painting I saw at the Thyssen Museum in Madrid, but it's not true to the painting. I've sort of made it fit my own nefarious purposes. So the poem refers to Bührer, who's the painter, and Rückingen, who is the subject. He's the wealthy man whose portrait was painted. And the poem is An Old Man in Great Trouble. The famished ermine trimming the patrician's coat was meant as an emblem of wealth. Is this the real-time sorrow And how did Burer bring it out on the patron's face? Through brumal medieval afternoons, when they sit near each other, as still as two lemons, fire thinned, a stubborn paint thickening like an adolescent's neck. Licking a brush, the painter brings in a worker from the farmyard below the windowsill, where Ruckingen rests his hand, the jewel in his ring pushing out of the canvas. What is the life of a poor man, the least bit lit at the tip of a stick of incense, whose name isn't on the frame's plate, his knee cocked, who leans over a wall, stares at a ruin on the horizon, fly-sized, both man and castle. He's supposed to be raking, but his mind is paralyzed, like a cart's wheel half sunk in mud. Is it his illness, unidentified, or the antique disaster of his father's maiming, or another, more general trouble, too great to contain in one homunculus, undulating invisibly over the expanse, dormant fields backed by foothills, then the inexorable elevations, each layer colder and darker of blue. How are you guys holding up? Everybody okay? All right, yay. It's really kind of nice to see people's faces. It's super cool. It feels very strange in a way because I can't hear anything, but it's really nice to see you. So thank you for being here. This next poem is an elegy to my dad, and there's a reference to Queen Isabel. There was I was told that there was this legend about Queen Isabel that she sold her jewelry to feed the poor. I'm not sure if that actually happened, but it's here in the poem at least. So Queen Isabel on Watch Hill. Impeccable waiters waver in corners as the Ocean House carousel cocktail stills me. I'll try to coax the rocking horse out of my ear. All hilltop curbs signed private. I parked 4 blocks down in an empty town. Now bankers own the old Portuguese fishermen's houses, their wide chestnut planks and Persian rugs seen only on weekends. I didn't know a bay could freeze in waves, ruffled in place where the sea's shallows are a pewter plate. In a dining room at the inn, 3 walls of casements fill up with the sound. How many bright panes. Fallen into the ranks of those alone, a glittering host meets my gaze over empty tables. My love of loves is less than a ghost, speaks to me, not from the next room or in dream. Holy memory, give me a crust, rich soup of his voice or light of his face on the glass, and I'll sell all my jewels to feed us, poor believers. So I've got 2 more poems for you guys. And so one of them is one of those poems about violence that I start the book with a section about gendered violence, and so I'll just read one of those and then end on sort of a more cheerful poem. So this poem is it's imagined to take place on a military base, and it's called Holes in Drywall Made by a Fist. Holes in drywall made by a fist are uneven, erode. They leak steadily, steadily, dust. What arguments gave rise to them, you ask? These craters poking walls to the side of windows. Holes make a living room appear askew, deranged. Whoever wanted out couldn't get there. Or maybe they were made to scare a lover. She froze, amazed, the first time he swung for the wall. Jaw clenched, and on impact, the fight flooded out of her. Limp now, not even screaming, dazed, taking in the concrete nature of her fear, a dense and solid thing she knows must fit inside her brain despite its size, refrigerator weight, its trick of slipping into dreams she'll have all week of dust, propelled in storms across the base, the sure report of her erasure. All right. And so the last poem that I will read is one that's set in elementary school somewhere. And it was inspired, and Iris Dunkel will, I think, recognize this reference, inspired by all these really gorgeous, gorgeous pear trees that bloom in the spring at the campus of the college where we used to teach together. And the parking lot has just, God, I don't know how many scores of these gorgeous, gorgeous trees, and they all bloom at the same time. So that, and also Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God. I was teaching at the time, and that kind of fed into this poem somehow too. So the poem is called Fevers. She, you know how she, in that book, she's writes about the tree, like that's a really big deal, that tree. So, okay, Fevers. It's never that someone spontaneously licks a desk. Pear tree's wild blossom drives me to distraction. Edgar licked my desk. Did you do something to make him lick your desk? I'm attached to my disconnection. Fall in love with a fraction. I want all these lambs to escape being mutton. Clumps of pale petals on gray angled branches. Thousands of lambs, each pear bough a glutton. Yellow pistils like whiskers on tiny cats, Persians. Pollen lofted to noses with allergic reactions, aversions. Infatuations without rhyme or reason. A girl caught the flu at the end of flu season. Don't touch me. Don't scoot up your chair. Don't even spring for a drink at the fountain. His tongue licked my desk. I can see the spit glisten. Asparagus comes up again at this season, phallic, aphrodisiac, perennially pleasing. Under a tree, enjoy beyond reason with the person or persons whose desk you have chosen. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Kathleen. Our next reader will be Kathryn Nuernberger. Rue is also her third book. And she apparently has also a book of lyric essays, which I would love to read. Now, if you buy this book, Rue, which I sincerely hope you will see that especially the long line poems in this book, of which there are many, are really they're really prose poetry. This is not poetry that heavily works its line breaks, like famously Robert Creeley. It's at the other end. It's about a smooth, transparent vehicle for the poet's voice. Now, like Kathleen's book, it goes virtually everywhere, from office politics to family poems, to poems about love, ICU poems about, the final breath of the open mouth of how we die, ekphrastic poems, history. But it is the voice of these poems that is really it's really their charge, their importance. This is a really striking voice, hypocrisy piercing, athletic in the way it moves through ideas. And so one can appreciate this voice the way you might appreciate an athletic performance, but also the motion of this mind is edifying. So this is really a wonderful book. Let's give her a warm welcome, Kathryn Nuernberger.
Thank you so much, Richard. What a close and thorough and generous reading of the book. I really appreciate that. And I also want to thank Joyce and Molly for putting this reading together. Yeah, Randall says in the chat, Richard's on fire, and that's for sure. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you all for being here. I'm so excited to be reading with Kathleen tonight. I think her book is so wonderful. She's such a fantastic poet in so many ways, but her ekphrastic poems knock me out all the time. I want to write like that. Okay, so I was trying to think about what I wanted to read about tonight, and I was just thinking about all of this this talk in recent weeks about understanding each other and these calls to understand each other. And I'm very interested in understanding people. I experience most humans as a complete mystery, and I often love that about them. Though sometimes I find myself forced to conclude that that in fact, I'm sorry, I was just having this nervous moment where I was like, oh my God, did I remember to unmute myself? But all right, well, anyway, I'm forced to conclude sometimes that I understand a person and their motivations maybe all too well. So this was a book, Rue, that I wrote a lot of in a spirit of trying to understand the people around me. I was living in a very conservative Missouri community, not too far from the city where I grew up. And so I'm going to read you poems today about this very difficult project of understanding each other. And I also picked poems that are about protection and accountability, which I think is language that's related to understanding that we don't hear so much in the public sphere right now. So I'll start with, I want to know you all. I was listening to this sort of ignorant blowhard go on about how teaching is a dumb profession. And I did this thing I always do, which is feel smug about how smart and sophisticated I am. But my smugness is a little compromised lately by how I do almost nothing all day besides have an affair in my mind and then wring my brain over what a divorce would do to my daughter, who heretofore has been lucky to have a happy, close family, not even too far off from how we pretend to be in public. So I just kept listening without my hackles up so much, and also was bemused by how alike we all are, admiring some people, judging others, thinking we're so special. And this guy had some good stories. One time, a history professor in college told him to go hang himself after he wrote 500 words about pheasants in the French Revolution. He said he must have mentioned those fired up and pitchfork-wielding pheasants a dozen times in that paper. That exasperated historian screaming peasants in the margins always reminded him of his dad, who does probate, which is basically a ton of archival research into plat maps and deeds, birth certificates, and death wishes. There are no secrets when someone contests a will. His dad once told him, "You wouldn't believe the number of cross-dressing farmers there are in Missouri," which made me laugh at first at the hypocrisy of this place, but then realize it's actually tragic how alone those farmers must feel. It's ruthless out here, I know, all the longing we till under only to let such a secret slip. Probate means some cousin or sister or brother described the dress in front of a judge who considered it fit evidence against a claim. I laughed because I can't imagine who you are. The man in coveralls who mocks the foamy fern I like poured onto my latte, the one who calls me hun that condescending way? Or are you the one always with the sign in front of my doctor's office, or the neighbor who mows the waysides of our country road down to stubble? Maybe you don't come to town if you can help it anymore either. I want you to know, whoever you are, as someone hungry for variety in the human condition, most especially my own, cross-dressing farmers, you light up the fields for me. I hope you walk into those soybean rows some nights and your flowered skirt swishes your legs in a way that feels like falling in love when you didn't think you ever could. Or maybe you feel rooted, belonging to this soil that made you. I don't know what's better, but I want for you such happiness and every last acre your bigot of a father left behind to go with it. So a couple summers ago, this is just a non sequitur, but I was thinking about it when I was rereading this poem preparing for tonight. I had the occasion, I watched a cop at a rural Missouri, Northwest Missouri. There's a lake and there's a beach by this lake, it's a public beach. And I watched this cop just harass and ogle young women up and down the beach for 45 minutes. And that was how I learned that you could just go to a police department website and find the link to file a complaint against a police officer, which I did, not because I thought anything would particularly come of what I had to say about what I'd seen, but I do know sometimes if you have enough enough accounts, or if you build up enough paperwork, you build up enough paperwork in this system, you can sometimes make something happen. And I certainly wanted to make sure there was paperwork. So anyway, I guess I just wanted to say I didn't do that not because I didn't understand rural Missouri police officers, but because I feel like I understand them all too well. So this poem is called I Want to Learn How. Varieties of performance include being very nice, or when you want instead to cultivate a genuine friendship, you might be very mean, because who would perform meanness? Or as the old axiom goes, true friends keep it real. But since authenticity is a performance like the rest, if you're still performing either way, it's probably nicer to play the part of nice, unless your audience also longs for genuine friendship, which most nice people do, in which case you ought to be mean to them, except for the part where mean is mean. Let's pause a moment and define our terms. Nice. When Glenn, a man I barely know who frequents the only coffee shop in this town, interrupts my quiet morning with a book to ask about my garden, while he runs his hand across my shoulder, at first like some sort of greeting, but then down my back, becoming bolder as I become more stiff and distant. I do not tell him this does not seem friendly at all, but rather like an end run around social prohibitions against copping a feel in public places on the bodies of women you don't really know. He is one of the men who owns this town, and I am a woman who moved here, but remains politically, socially, and religiously outside of here. So I say nicely, tomorrow we're putting in okra. Mean. When Glenn, a retired police officer I talk about gardening with at the coffee shop, comes over to put his hand on my shoulder and then my back, I stop him and say, Glenn, it makes me uncomfortable when you touch me like that. We're only friendly acquaintances, and that's a pretty intimate gesture. What to do? I can imagine Glenn's sad face when he realizes, to his great embarrassment, that he's been one of those pathetic old men touching and flirting with a younger woman who was just being nice but getting angrier each time. I don't like that outcome. I don't want Glenn to feel he's been mean. It's not nice. I can also see how Glenn would, a few days or hours later when the sorry wears off, tell the other men who run this town and sit together every morning drinking coffee what a frigid bitch I am. He might phrase it nicer than that, because he's a Christian man, as he likes to say. But then I would see the knowing eyes of those men everywhere I go. Among the men at Glenn's table are the town doctor, who I may someday in an emergency need to let touch me, and also administrators from my workplace. Sometimes I complain about how I can't decide what to do about Glenn, to other men who are friends of mine and with whom I also work, and who at the office outrank me, but who also have children my child likes to play with, and wives I do not work with, whose husbands my friends at work who outrank me have suggested I might like to go shop with. I think these men might know words I don't know for a situation like this one with Glenn, because they are men. Perhaps this is a socially constructed misunderstanding on my part. But no, they agree it seems pretty sexual and inappropriate, and add that Glenn probably knows pretty well exactly what he's doing, as I suspected. They shrug and say, why don't you just tell him you don't like it? Or they shrug and say, what's the big deal? And I feel like they have never really imagined themselves inside such a situation, and they don't really think about how to imagine it even now, when I'm asking so nicely that they try. Why are we even talking about something so small and inconsequential, they seem to suggest, with their pinched tones and hunched shoulders? Nice is not talking about Glenn anymore. Mean, because I relive this coffee shop dilemma 3+ times a week, and it is the shop where my friendship with these other men unfolds too, and because I like to work and think in coffee shops, and I like many other people and talks I have in this shop, the only one within 30 miles of my house and place of work. And anyway, should we really solve the problem of harassment in such a cowardly, impotent way, I say, look, if we're really friends, and if you don't want to be another of these microaggressive sexists perpetuating a patriarchal social system through an attitude of dismissiveness that makes it hard for some women to ever feel comfortable being themselves or saying what's on their minds, if that kind of authenticity is even possible, you should hear this story I'm telling as if it is a serious conundrum of a moral nature. Because it is not unreasonable for a woman to think she has a responsibility to address men crossing boundaries shamelessly for the purposes of making a woman into an object they feel free to touch. Nor is it unreasonable for that same woman to worry that such correction in a town this small will make it hard for her to continue providing security and community for her family in a town where there are few jobs not at the chicken rendering facility 20 miles south on Highway 39. And so this small but unfixable situation will piss her off, and she will want to talk about how she is pissed off, in no small part because in general, she is the kind of woman who knows how to solve problems efficiently with little fanfare. And that is even one of the reasons you hired her and like her, if in fact you do like her. What to do? I see these men, open friends of mine, trying to arrange their sad faces because they like to think they themselves are feminists. They'd tell a man not to touch them in a heartbeat, they think, if it ever happened to them. They'd tell Glenn not to touch me if that's what I'm asking for. It is not at all what I'm asking for. If I were mean enough to decide I really wanted us to understand and know each other, as true friends do, I don't know what I would say. I might say all this, and then they might say there are other words besides nice and mean. They might say there are other definitions. Perhaps they will tell me if I give them a reason, or perhaps they will walk away and we will never speak of it again, as usually happens. Phew, I never read that one out loud before. I wasn't sure how it would feel to do that many pages. Hope you're still with me. I'm going to read one called I'm Worried About You in the Only Language I Know How. There was a young woman with a boyfriend, I guess that's what he was, on a bench beside her overstuffed duffel bag. She was wiping at something in her eye, and when he motioned her to follow him and leave the bag behind, she was slow to follow. He took her by the hand, and looking at her face, I was afraid for her, and also for us, sitting near this unattended luggage, as close as we were to the station. Though I chastised myself for being so bougie. And anyway, there she was, just across the park, chatting with 3 men he seemed to know, glancing now and again at her bag, like someone who'd be back in just a minute. We were all in the shadow of a precarious metal sculpture of 2 dragons interlaced with treacherous staircases and slides for children. My daughter wanted me near her on this wild ride, so then I was the one leaving our bags. What is it in this upper middle class mothering experience that makes it necessary to keep reminding myself people hardly ever just steal your stuff? Every time I look at this little girl of mine, I can't believe how much I have to lose. Already I'd watched her take the plank of the dragon's gleaming tongue so fast she slid right across the pad onto the rough concrete and flipped onto her face. But she is tough, like a girl carrying a heavy suitcase far from home, so she rubbed her raw cheek and made a low growl to spit out the pain and went back up. Once there was a hideout nestled in the interlocking tails, but someone has welded a cage door with a padlock over the entrance. From the used toilet paper that surrounds this place, I can understand why. No one has taken that young woman's bag, I noticed from the crow's nest welded between the dragon's eyes, but she is entirely gone now, and so is that black van the men were all leaning against. The one I thought was her boyfriend is gone too. I'm worried about her and all those backward glances, because I followed men I shouldn't have trusted to places I didn't think I could leave either. And even now I'm not sure what I would have done differently. I tell my daughter often that if you need help, look for a mother with children. In a world of strangers, I can't imagine the one who wouldn't try to help a child who asked. Another kid is climbing up the slide. The first thing she did was pull off her stocking so her bare feet could give her purchase on the slick steel. She's a clever little girl who knows where she is. Whenever my daughter tries to lisp and stutter the bit of language she knows here, other children stare in silence as if her words have no meaning. So she watches that big kid in mute admiration and then sets to work discovering what you can accomplish with your own bare feet. I slip back to the bench and pretend to look at other things because I know it's good for her to think her mother isn't always watching. Beside my feet is that lost bag. I wish there was something I could have thought to do about it, something I had known how to say when that girl caught my eye. And this poem is called You Get What You Get and You Don't Throw a Fit. On the island at the other end of Whalefish upon Leviathan, you'll find the people who are half man and half one huge foot they use to hop around or umbrella themselves against the rain. Beast women composed chiefly of fur and leaves, archers at war with a battalion of blue cranes, and the conquistadors roasting a headless man on a spit. It seems the world of fish goes on into a forever of possibilities, and then they wash up here on the beaches of Denmark with their bellies full of squid beaks and rubbery tentacles, their mouth faces stretched out into improbable grimaces as if they swam straight from the banks of that continent where the woman, who is also a bird, has a body that is perhaps penguinoid, though you wouldn't have thought until you saw this picture how much the tuxedo belly of a penguin is shaped like a vagina waddling around flip-flopping those awkward labia. She's bigger than the men shooting their little arrows at her. It almost seems they are the ones in danger, to study the crook of their smiles. The fishmonger, who wished his life had been something different, drew these maps of what he heard while he weighed the sailors' hauls. Here's a star that blooms its 6 spiny legs right out of the abyss of its own mouth. If you are generous, you might call it a jellyfish. If you are generous, you can almost make his illustrations match up to the world as you know it. It is generous, after all, to draw one diagram after another of everything you'd like to know. The lines of nations and the swirls of ocean currents become true enough. In each little demarcation of a city, the cartographer knew a man, he'd heard a story, they'd shared a drink. Each of these sailors, their stars eternally etched at the mouth of a river that cuts across the endless lavender of its country, could be anywhere now. People disappear from this shore into the bellies of fin-tailed monsters at an astonishing rate. I wish I could imagine the roving stars of a woman or two, but this is a story of the sea, not the biography of some girl who thinks world history 1492 to last week should have a different XY axis. The stars are in their places, the ports in theirs. If there was ever one like me, she's plotted nowhere except on a map of latitude what was and longitude what might have been. Under such circumstances, we must try to be generous with each other. It is an extraordinary undertaking. Adrian Cohen's 800-page Wiesbook, commonly known as the Fish Book, contains depictions of the no less than 17-foot-long sea beast who appeared off the Brazilian coast, strutting upon his hind flippers. It includes the Seebishop with his requisite hat, wand, slippers, chasuble, and gloves. Of course, when I say we must, I mean you must do whatever you want, and I will do the same. Sometimes a very small god or a very small planet falls from the sky and makes a splash. Sometimes a captain washes up on shore and the world's largest, most cosmopolitan slave market is born. I know you can't make a woman out of a boat any more than you can find the mother you need in a penguin. Adrian left out the mermaids, as you must if you wish for your enterprise to be taken seriously as scholarship and nonfiction. Mermaids, the cartographers have spoken. Gather your cranes, brush out the leaves of your fur. It is time we set sail, that we might be generous with our plunder and generous with our spoils, that we might star every city on this page with the lives we have known. I haven't read too many of these poems, but the book's title, Rue, comes from a series of poems about plants historically used for birth control. Rue is one of them, Penny Royale is another, The Bird of Paradise, Queen Anne's Lace. So there's a whole series of poems about these things. Spoiler alert, I guess I could say, none of them work very reliably so far as we know. The ones that work pretty well are work because they're so toxic that there's a real risk of killing the mother. So I really cannot recommend strongly enough that we just keep the methods for birth control we have, which are quite safe and reliable. There was one plant I came across that I learned was actually considered to be very efficacious, and you'll learn in the poem, but I'll also tell you it will probably come as no surprise that that one was promptly extincted, so it's not available to us anymore. But I think about that plant all the time because I think about, of course, how easy it would be to, or how likely at any event it is that our methods of birth control might be extincted under the present Supreme Court. So I'll read you this poem called Regarding Silphium, the Birth Control of the Roman Empire for 600 Years, Extincted by Careless Land Management in the year 200 AD. When I was just about done being married, and he was a blossomed out nerve of seeing himself through the ugly eyes of how I had come to see him, and myself, for letting our lives get so Tupperware fur molded, for thinking I could lace and pinprick it back with just the right delicacy, when a good punch in the face was what a mess this bad required. I know you're thinking a punch in the face is never the answer, but that's the lace talking. When I was just about done with the lace-throated maybe violence, our daughter, who is 5, told me how he broke. She didn't say he broke. She said he got really worked up driving past all the protesters outside Planned Parenthood on Providence Avenue, from which the University Medical School had just withdrawn funding, and also the option for residents to do training there. How he took a hard left into the parking lot and with our daughter by the hand, marched in with an urgency that made the young man working the desk say, "Sir," with some alarm. He took a breath to be more steady and said, "I'm so sorry about all of this, all of that out there, and I just thought I'd make a donation." As he pulled all the money from his wallet, some of it crumpled, a mixture of 5s and 1s, and pushed it across the counter, our daughter watching and looking around the room, studying the faces of timid and nervous young women, I imagine, in those plastic chairs I remember from when I once sat in this exact waiting room myself so many years ago, feeling embarrassed and ashamed because it seemed that's what I was supposed to feel. Though if I could have felt my way beyond supposed to back then to my actual self, I would have known I didn't feel sorry at all, only annoyed by the tedium of appointments, the practical necessity of that clean smell, the chilly, dustless air of a building with nothing soft except the aspect of the resident, who is the only doctor I've ever had who joked as she put her gloved hand in my body, "I guess this is the most awkward thing you'll do today, huh?" It was funny and made me feel like we've been friends a long time. My husband, who is still my husband after all, knew that story, and I guess he wanted our daughter to somehow know it too. Sometimes you'll feel very alone. I tell her on a day when I find her pressing her face against the window, watching the children next door play in the grass and wiping tears from her face as fast as they fall. Other times, you'll be so wonderfully surprised by the strange bridges people manage to build out to you when you never would have expected they could. Thank you all so much for listening.
There you go.
Kathleen, Kate, thank you both so much. What a great pleasure. Here comes Joyce to sign us off.
Hi, thanks so much. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you all for joining us today. This recording will be on the Poetry Flash Facebook page after this reading. So if you want to share it with someone else, it will be there. And eventually, it'll be on a new Poetry Flash YouTube channel that'll launch soon. So thank you so much for joining us today. There's a book link in the chat box to purchase these 2 wonderful new books. And just thank you so much again. Thanks for joining us.